mountains of Western North Carolina. And today is going to, I think it's a really beautiful topic that we're going to be discussing and covering. But for starters, happy Easter, everybody. And, it seems like on Easter Sunday, there are a good number of television shows about the life of Jesus and Moses and all that. And I enjoy them. I don't watch them all, but when I do, some interesting things happen. They were talking about the parting of the Red Sea, Scotty? And they were talking about how that water right there is very shallow.
Yeah.
And so when the winds come a certain way, when the tide is low and all that, you can wade right across it. And if the winds are strong enough, it just becomes like a no water at all on that area. And so they were saying that could have been when the Red Sea parted. And then, of course, the winds, if they stopped, then the water would rush back down onto the, ancient Egyptians, and it was very well done because it's at the same time. But even if that's the case, what's the probability of that happening? It's about zero, So, and then he says could be divine intervention. So I don't know. I just enjoy watching those things. But it always makes me think, I think all religions, everything gets reduced down to the lowest common denominator, how much interest do people have? How rigorous do they want to get with their understanding? Does it need to all be intellectually understood or not? I think the deeper we understand something, the better. But at the same time, I can understand why, the majority of people don't have the time or inclination to go that deeply, and so when I watch things about Christianity, I don't know, in a way it kind of troubles me in a way because it's like, wow, because what happens is that if the expression of it gets too superficial, then it gets twisted. And then there's this talk about, the resurrection. And that's, they say how that's foundational to Christianity, is believing that Christ rose from the dead. And I don't think it's foundational. I mean, I'm not saying he did. I'm not saying he didn't. If he did, well, they talk about supernatural. Well, the transcendent is supernatural. It depends on how you define the word. Beyond nature, well, it's all nature. It's the essence of nature, really, the Veda, the absolute, the transcendent Chaitanya, the Christ. But in that sense, it's not, in that strict regard, it's not supernatural because it's inherent in the nature of the absolute, inherent in the nature of Chaitanya. From the Christian perspective, inherent in the nature of the Christ, But what's really most important is what the Christ is, what the transcendent is, what Chaitanya is. And in that regard, and please don't misunderstand me, I don't mean to sound offensive. It's not offensive. It's quite the opposite. But whether or not Christianity is valid is not based upon whether or not there was a resurrection. I have no problem with there was. I mean, read the Vedic literature. There are all kinds of things like that. But the Christ, who Jesus knew he was, what Jesus knew he was, lies so far beyond, whether or not there was a resurrection. Does that make sense, Scotty?
100%.
Yeah, I hope that doesn't sound offensive to people because it's not intended to be, quite the contrary, Well, all right. So anyway, it was interesting, Scotty, how this podcast developed, because not more than just a few days ago, Scotty, you and I were on the phone, and we were talking about a topic that does come up from time to time in the news, and that is just that how the world is so bombarded with different perspectives and different little short blasts, and how it puts so much pressure on people. You know, you go to YouTube or TikTok. I never been on TikTok, but I do go to YouTube. But you go to YouTube and there's one person that just plays the piano incredibly, and then the next one, somebody who dances incredibly, and then another one, some fantastic genius, and then the next one they're talking about, you know, nuclear war is potentially around the corner, and then pressure on diet, pressure on exercise. I mean, I started the list. You can see it in my notes here. It just, the list is endless. And then what does that do to people? Especially young kids, and I understand especially teenage girls. There's so much pressure on them to be all these things, including beautiful and clever and this and that. And people can't handle the pressure. And so I thought to do a podcast about that. And where it led was somewhere incredibly beautiful. And it just speaks to the depth and breadth, the all-encompassing nature of Vedic knowledge. Because the only way I really felt that I could really even convey, and again, I didn't go into it from the perspective of, okay, we're going to do something on Vedic knowledge. I did it from the perspective of all the pressure that's being put on people, particularly kids, you know. But it just naturally led to, oh my goodness, this is about Vedic knowledge. And so I'd like to go into that. And so I'm going to talk about the structure of the Veda some. And just, you know, a word of warning in the past when I do this, you know, you're going to hear all these different terms: Nyaya, Shiksha, Karma, Mimansa, Vedanta, Jyotish, some Samskrutis, Sampradaya, you know. And so a lot of times people get so caught up at, oh, I don't know what all these words are, and they kind of lose track of the whole thing. And don't worry about that. If you know these words, if you enjoy having them explained by definitions and that's great. But really what I want to get at here is the concept and the understanding of the whole thing. And if we can convey that, it would be magnificent, you know. So let's go for it, you know.
Michael,
Sir.
One thing I have to say about that is that from the years of being around you, hearing the words and all that, and just kind of just letting it flow over you, and then reading books and stuff like that with those words in it, it's weird how over time or over the washings or whatever, you start to understand what those words are.
That's a good point, because for me, you know, I don't know how many, it was a while ago now, but I had the same experience, all these words and what do they mean? But just over time, don't push it. Don't even make that a goal necessarily.
Right.
What's really important is the concept. So that's a good point, Scotty. Just be easy with the words. But to those of you who are into Vedic knowledge and have heard these words a lot, sometimes a podcast like this, I think people find very fulfilling. And oh gosh, now I get what those are really about on some deeper level, you know. Well, the other thing I want to say about it is that I even look at my old podcasts, or actually my old writings about different aspects of the Veda and stuff, and even those, anytime you talk about this, it's limited in a way, because the Veda knowledge is so vast. Every aspect of the Veda is all encompassing. It reaches out and includes the totality of the Veda. It's all seamlessly integrated. So those of you that might be listening that are Vedic scholars or know, you know, a lot about the Veda, you're going to hear what I have to say. And from a particular perspective, even though I get a lot of appreciation from people like that, but nevertheless, there's so much more that could be said. Okay. So Scotty, you were going to say something?
Yeah. I think even time, your understanding of the word can change, you know, and your understanding deeper,
for sure.
or, you know, just, yeah.
For sure. That's right. It's just deeper and deeper, broader and broader, you know.
Right.
All right. So anyway, let's start. And we're going to start by talking about two major branches, if you will, of Vedic literature, Vedic knowledge. Um, and those would be the Upangas and the Vedangas. Now, and we're saying it again, it's all from a particular perspective, but you can look from one perspective at the Upangas just to try to convey, get a feeling for what they are. The Upangas, it's kind of like to say it simplistically, really, if God, if you will, was to write an instruction manual for life, uh, uh, that would be the Upangas. The Vedangas, on the other hand, is kind of, you could look at it this way, it's kind of like from the perspective of the individual and their experience as they evolve and they gravitate back to that totality of knowledge, to God, if you will. And so the Upangas then, they start with something called Nyaya. And what is that? It's just basic, fundamental logic, common sense, if you will, understanding, just in its most seed form, its most fundamental form. And then as we grow and we evolve, that unfolds more and more to encompass all of existence, all of relativity. It expands all the way out. And then from there, you get into like the process of, okay, now we've got this whole thing, and now how do we find it within ourselves? And so then it speaks about that until it gets to well, it ultimately gets to Vedanta, which, I've talked about the Brahma Sutras, sometimes called the Vedanta Sutras, and an understanding of life on that level, of existence on that level. Now, the Vedangas, on the other hand, okay, is that good, Scotty? That's clear?
Yeah.
Okay. The Vedangas, on the other hand, you could look at it from the perspective that the Vedangas, see, all of this is built out of sound. It's called Shruti. And sounds are like the fundamental building blocks, the letters of Sanskrit alphabet, if you will. They were born out of the absolute. It's a mechanic. It's physics, really, of existence. And so those fundamental sounds well up through the individual. And that's why when you study Sanskrit, it's a lot about how words are articulated, the structure of the mouth and all, because it's all about evolution of species and how we evolved out of that to a sophisticated enough level that we can embody it, And so what is the process of a child being born? What do they start with? They start with different vowel sounds, ma, mommy, and ah, it starts with ah, the first letter of the Vedic alphabet, Sanskrit alphabet. Okay, and so now we're talking about sound and how sound evolves and ultimately culminates in something called Jyotish. In other words, the sounds you embody, and it's all about grammar then from that perspective, and all about language, and all about articulation, and all about how we're now articulating and giving expression to life in a way that's so consistent with the very fundamental nature of existence. And then it ultimately culminates in something called Jyotish. Jyotish means light. So it culminates in the place where you see the light, and so you can see there's a correlation there between Upangas and Vedangas. The first part of the Upangas is fundamental building blocks, Nyaya, fundamental building blocks of logic and reason and common sense and like that. And that correlates to the first step in Vedanga language, if you will, which is Shiksha. And Shiksha is the different letters of Sanskrit and how it builds on that. So the one builds on reason and common sense and knowledge and intellect, and but intellect not in a sense. It includes just intellect, but it also just the intelligence inherent in the nature of what it means to be human, and to refine that and to develop that. And so it's really interesting then, right before you get to Vedanta, which is total enlightenment, Brahma Sutras, and which is in the Upangas, or Jyotish, which is in the Vedangas. Okay, right before that, in the step right before that, there's multiple steps, and the step right before that in the Upangas is called Karma Mimansa. Karma Mimansa deals with, you could say, relativity, karma, action, right when it's on the verge of finding its fulfillment in the total wholeness, which is Vedanta. And it's interesting that in Vedangas, that step right before total enlightenment, which in the Vedangas is referred to as Jyotish, seeing the light, that's called Chandas. Now, that's very interesting. And if you listen to my talks about Chandas and the different aspects of the Veda, Yajur Veda deals with Chandas. There's Rishi Devata Chandas, that whole thing. Chandas then is, you could say, well, I say that the Yajur Veda pundits, I call them, Panditji likes this, he laughs when I say, they're like the cosmic engineers, because they're the ones that take those fundamental building blocks, that fundamental structure, and they work with it. They work with it. They're engineers, and so that's where the yogis come in, and all these different things that they do to bring about the unfoldment of the perfection within the absolute into relativity. It's a technology, and that's what really Mount Soma is all about. Is we want to bring forth that technology of an enlightened city that's in the Vedic literature. But anyway, that's a Chandas value. And to me, it's just so incredibly exquisite and beautiful that Karma Mimansa, which is part of the Upangas, kind of corresponds with the Chandas value, which is in the Vedangas. So you see every step, like Nyaya and Shiksha, basic fundamental knowledge in the letters of the Sanskrit alphabet, for example. There's a correlation there. One's Upangas, the first step, the other's first step of Vedangas. And it goes like that all the way up to Vedanta and Jyotish. They correspond. One is full enlightenment, the other is fully seeing the light, which is enlightenment. So that's how that all works. Now, what in the world does all this have to do? What does this have to do with what we're talking about here, about young girls getting confused and all the different pressures that we have on people, and no wonder the world is going crazy. It's just, even the internet, even though I think the internet is great, there's the negative aspect of it, and put so much pressure on people, it's driving them nuts. They don't know how to deal with it. And you get this feeling like you have to be a Buckaroo Banzai type person to be okay. Buckaroo Banzai is some movie, grade B movie, I guess. I really don't know. But it was about some guy who was all these different things. He was a brain surgeon, a Rocky musician, a 007 agent. I think maybe he had supernatural powers. I don't know. So you don't have to be a Buckaroo Banzai to be fulfilled and have a great life. And that's where, and we could say within the domain of Karma Mimansa, action in life, refined on the most subtle level, which brings us to the highest level of existence, which is Vedanta. But Karma Mimansa then deals with two things. Well, it deals with many things, but two aspects of it. One is Samskruthi, which is culture, and the other is Sampradaya, which is tradition. And so I've talked about how cultures, what are cultures versus traditions? Okay. In India, there's a particular Vedic culture, foundational to the country. In the United States, Christianity is fundamental to the culture. In the Middle East, you have Islam, and these are different cultures. Each, when healthy, wells up and brings forth the perfection within the absolute into a person's life, into their behavior. That's the arena of karma mimansa, understanding nature and living in accord with it. And Maharishi Jaimini wrote the Jaimini Sutras, which is all about karma mimansa. And it's so beautiful just to listen to, because it's like, well, you do this, but then on the other hand, not so because of, that's one aspect of it. And it's my favorite aspect because it just brings forth, somehow you feel it in your body when you even listen to the recitations of the reconciliation of the paradoxical nature of existence, which speaks to how profound all of this is. But we want to stay here with culture and tradition because we have the different cultures. But within any culture, and cultures are a good thing. It's not like we want one big homogenous culture that is the right culture for the world. Laws of nature are different in different parts of the world. So there are different needs based on the environment, if you will. There are different needs for different areas on the surface of the planet. And so it cultures the mind in a manner that is what? In harmony with nature. The nature of what? Where you're living. But then there's also this thing of tradition. Tradition are kind of, you might say they're like subsets of culture. Different groups, even in India, some worship primarily or exclusively Vishnu, others Shiva. Those are different traditions. And traditions, they're subsets of traditions. In India, for example, different cities have a particular deity. And the specific name for that deity is a very specific aspect of a particular deity. And that's true in this country too. You have Catholics and you have Lutherans, it's different traditions. And each of those traditions, when healthy and when adhered to in a manner that is what? In harmony with nature, evolves the person. And there are different traditions. And traditions go into subsets of that, which are like the family dynamic, family traditions. And if you can just feel it, like family tradition, like even with Christmas, that different families have different traditions, what they do traditionally every Christmas, And what do these things do? These traditions, they nurture, they feed, they support the individual within the culture. And all that, you see, then is contained within karma mimansa, and it all deals with the culturing of an individual. We don't have to be a buckaroo banzai. In fact, we're not even supposed to be. We live a life that is not homogenous, and it's a no holds barred, no need for cultural integrity because I'm one. So you can be a world person, a world man. Some people refer themselves as a world man. But that doesn't mean that it's a smorgasbord and you just take your pick of what culture you are a part of in the moment. And it's so beautiful to watch really enlightened people, because when they function in different cultures, other than the one they were, it's inherent in their nature because that's the way their physiology has been nourished and nurtured, which happens incidentally on a DNA level through generations, you see. So you can't just pick another culture and Yahoo, you can hold your own integrity and honor other cultures. And to me, Vedic knowledge is that foundational understanding. That's what this podcast is all about. That feeds, when related to in a healthy way, feeds and nurtures all the different cultures. So you see, the way I use the word Veda then, and the way the real Vedic scholars would use the word, I'm sure, is that Veda is that foundational root of all of life that feeds all the different branches. And in a healthy culture, regardless if it's a Christian culture or Vedic culture or Hindu culture or Islamic or whatever, they all feed off of that one foundational root of life. You see? Oh, and that's called your Dharma. Dharma is what's inherent in your nature and how to live, how to function, how to be. Fundamentally inherent in your very nature of your being, to the depth of your being, to the depth of your soul, and even beyond, into the absolute value of your soul. That gets into how a definition of soul that I don't think we need to get into here. So the soul is like the expression of the divinity within, whereas the divinity within lies beyond anything relative. And the soul, then, in that sense, even though it can be profoundly subtle, is still part of the relative. Anyway, so we do well. We do well. And who am I? Who are you? And it's not a superficial answer that we're looking for here. It's a foundational, fundamental answer. It goes right to the root of the DNA and beyond. It's who and what you are. And the idea of an enlightened culture is a culture then that every individual, regardless of their tradition, even if you happen to be a Christian living in India or an Hindu living in America or whatever, the culture itself nurtures that most fundamental value, that most fundamental tradition that feeds your life. Can you imagine growing up and living in an environment, in a society, in a culture, in a neighborhood, in a home, where all of that feeds and nurtures that fundamental nature of who it is and what it is you truly are? But with all this bombardment that we're getting, it's hard for people to do. People are getting confused. So don't forget the root of your being. And who you are isn't about some hodgepodge redefinition and reshuffling of the deck. It's about discovering that true nature within yourself. All right, I think that's enough for this podcast, Scotty's. That's about it, huh?
Well, I was wondering, is it okay to look at those things and say, and have it give you inspiration to look for that thing inside of you? You know what I mean? So
Absolutely. It's
yeah,
all about relationship with.
yeah,
It's not about the thing. It's about, is your relationship with that thing healthy? You know, I mean, this is the whole volumes we could write about this, but it also has the idea of a child, and they grow up and they go from oneness. You know, it's not mother and baby; it's baby mother. You know, it's that's Winnicott's work. You know, and it's one unit, and the child feels no separation. It's oneness with mother. And then what happens is that in the individuation process, at one point, there's a separation there. And not just then from mother, but from father, from family, from the whole dynamic. You're individuating, you see. And so that can be a delicate process, especially if your connection to the root isn't strong, the root of your being, because then it turns into rebellion and anarchy and all kinds of chaos, really, in your own life. You see?
now
Yeah.
another thing is bringing it kind of back to Easter and Jesus and that
Mm.
kind of thing. Um, Jesus was a fully realized embodiment of God,
Of the
right?
Christ, of God, of the totality of Chaitanya, however you want to say it. Yeah.
Right. And what, so on that resurrection, is there something that, like was realized then, or is that just, a story, like how does that play into like maybe a Vedic explanation of what happened there? Or
Well, it all has to do with the level of one's relationship with what happened, and insight. And does your perspective on it narrow your worldview, or does it expand it? You know, it's all about relationship with. And even the idea, off on a tangent here, sorry, but the whole idea of, if there are UFOs and other intelligences, it would really undermine Christianity. No, it wouldn't. Not if your understanding of Christianity is deep. The Christ, Chaitanya, the absolute, the transcendent, encompasses everything that's out there. So it would just be a underscoring, an exclamation point to the grandeur of Christ, if you will, not an undermining, not by any means, you see. But if you have a kind of a narrow, limited, closed-minded, blinders on relationship with Christianity or whatever religion, it could feel like an undermining, even though it's quite the opposite. Is that responsive?
Yeah, and in your explanation, that whole thing, it was just kind of sparking, like in me, what would happen to me is that I would have a full realization, seeing him, that it almost resurrected, where maybe I was dead inside about that whole thing.
Sometimes I've talked about it like it's not about new information so much as it is about a deeper understanding of the information you already have. Yeah. People look for, what's this new, or what's this new, or what's this new? No. I mean, that's fine if you want to do that, and I enjoy it myself, But what's really important is having a deeper understanding of everything, be it new or be it something that you've had your whole life, you see?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, everybody. Happy Easter. Thanks for listening. I hope this podcast was understood and received well. My Rudraksha tree is right there. And he's going to be going outside here in a couple of days. I think by next week, when the weather's nice, he likes to spend his summers outside. All right. Thank